known as server uncertainty. And usually server uncertainty period is short time. That is time needed for coordinator to receive and process the votes. Right? But in certain situations, there could be failure that can lengthen this process, which may cause problems. Server uncertainty period can become too long, because if failure occurs to some server, then the server may not reply because it failed. So the coordinator may have to wait after the timeout period so that you know the server fails, because any server fail, then you cannot commit. So at that time, then you will decide to abort. So for those other servers who voted for yes, may have to wait for a long time before the coordinator make that decision. Even worse, you can have a situation where coordinator fail. So when coordinator fail, then some server have to detect that, so that you do election to elect a new coordinator, and the new coordinator at the moment, they know that the old coordinator failed, and of course if any fail, then the result will be no. Then you will issue the no to the server who has voted for yes before, and tell them that to abort. Right? So this can be time which is prolonged. Okay. So that's the situation. But in any case, in the presence of failure, no matter whether the failure occurred to the coordinator or the transactional server, or any time, that is before the phase 1 voting phase, during the voting phase, or after during the completion phase. In any situation, the recovery in two-phase commit protocol has to be correctly executed. And indeed, that would be the case. So let's elaborate all the situation. First situation, failure prior to start of 2PC. 2PC doesn't mean two personal computer, okay? It's two-phase commit. Okay. What's 2PL? What's 2PL? Two-phase locking. All right? I use this abbreviation. Failure prior to the start of 2PC results in a fault. Because any failure occur, then you know that it hasn't started the transaction at all. Of course, that will be a fault. That is, the transaction never happens. The coordinator, if fail prior to transmitting commit messages, you'll result in a fault. If the coordinator fail, okay, but before you send out any commit messages, then nobody actually will commit, right? So in that case, then result would be the transaction aborts. So that's also consistent. After that point, meaning that if any commit message has been sent out, in other words, if the coordinator already collect all the yes vote, and then start to issue the commit to any of the transactional server, and during that time it fails, if that's the case, because the transactional server, some of them has received a command, then coordinator will retransmit all the commit messages on restart. Because this coordinator eventually will restart or replaced by another coordinator, and the record showing that some transactional server received the command already, that record is somewhere that can be discovered. If that's the case, then it has to commit, right? Because everybody already voted for yes, and the failed coordinator has recovered, then the result of that transaction has to commit. Is that clear? Okay, so that can also be consistently determined. Now, let's talk about server, not the coordinator. If server fails prior to voting, it will abort. It doesn't vote and it fails, right? Because the vote hasn't been collected. Eventually, coordinator, after timeout, will know that there's no vote from this particular server. The result will be abort. So this server will know that you will abort. If the server, this it means this server, if the server fail after the voting, and here we assume that it voted for yes, okay, and it fails, it doesn't know the result, then it just sends get decision after it recover, just sends a get decision and to know the result. Okay, if it's a commit, then it's commit. If it's abort, then it's abort. And finally, if it fail after the commit, after committing means that it commits already. So it need to do is just resend the committed messages. Okay, so these again are also very clear about the final decision. In other words, in the two-phase commit protocol, no matter failure occur at what time to which server, all the participating server can have a consistent decision about whether transaction aborts or commits. Okay, I just elaborate all the situation over here. So in other words, the two-phase commit protocol can guarantee correct recovery of any failures. Okay, so this is what it says over here. Now, how about complexity of this process? The two-phase commit protocol, if I assume there are n transactional server, one of them will be the coordinator. So one coordinator, n-1 participants, n-1 server. So I'm the coordinator, and totally you are n-1 over here. Okay. The complexity means that how many messages are needed in order to execute the two-phase commit protocol. So let me ask you, how many messages are exchanged here? How many? They are two-phase, right? Means 2 rounds. 2 rounds, each round involve how many messages? n-1 times 2, right? I send message to ask for your vote, and you send your vote back. That's the voting phase, right? And second phase is that if commits, then I send message to all of you, right? And then you actually have committed and send me back. So normally, assuming n participant process, n-1 voting request from coordinator to server, n-1 from server back to the coordinator. At most, n-1 completion request from coordinator to server. This is when it commits. When it aborts, then you don't need that many messages. Why? When it aborts, you don't need n-1 completion or aborting messages. Why? Aborting messages only need to send to whom? Those voted for yes. Those voted for no, they already abort, because they can unilaterally abort the thing. So it will only need to send to those voted for yes. So that's less than n-1. Okay? And when commit, n-1 the conversion from the server back to the coordinator. So in other words, the number of messages linear to the number of process participants, including coordinates. Assuming n participating servers, then you need at most 4 times n-1, which is order of 4n. Order of n, that is linear to the number, which is a good complexity. Complexity request is linear in the number of participating server. Okay, so this is actually not too complex. Number, if the complexity is the order, in the order of n, it is very good protocol. Okay. There are other protocols that we actually would assign to homework maybe later on, is to look into more complex protocols with more messages, maybe n square messages. Okay, but it can convert faster. Disadvantage of two-phase commit protocol is that the server uncertainty period can be long, so it can not convert very fast because the number of messages is linear to the number of participants. But if we increase the messages, then we can buy the time for the decision to commit. Okay, there are other protocols in order to do that. Oh, by the way, this was assigned in your homework to you already, right? But I just realized that homework include a problem which I won't teach until lecture topic 8. So what do you want to do with this homework? I would then suggest that you don't need to turn it in. Is that this Friday?
Sunday.
The 1st of November, right? Sundays, actually. Originally, I asked you to turn in on November 1st, right? So homework, this homework number 2. So the due, original due is November 1st, right? Original, okay? So because this includes a problem which I won't teach until next lecture after the midterm. So I will just delay this by 2 weeks, okay? So this change it to November plus 14 will be November 15. Due date will be November 15. In other words, after the lecture, next lecture, which is 2 weeks from today, and that's due on that Sunday, okay? Is that reasonable? I think it's probably better that way. You have more time to work on this one. The disadvantage is that some homework which was related to early lecture, maybe related to the midterm, I won't be able to post solution to you. Okay, you have more time to work on that. The midterm, we'll talk about at the end of today's class, but midterm has some problem very similar to the homework or in-class practice, okay? Particularly if something occurs in both homework and in-class practice, that means that I probably will test it in the midterm as well.
Oh no.
Okay?
Then some of the we cannot revise for some of the homework questions which may be happen in next week midterm.
At the end of today's class, I give you some kind of preview, okay? And you can ask me questions. But for this particular homework, I just delay that for 2 weeks. Okay. Yeah, one person missing, the lady student. Can you guys tell her?
Yep.
Okay. Otherwise, everybody is here. Okay, so these are the complexity. In other words, complexity is simple, but we sacrifice for the time we need to determine whether it's commit or abort. There are other protocols which can make the decision faster because it can reduce the server uncertainty period and the price of sending more messages. Sometimes the complexity may be square of the number of messages, n squared, rather than n. Linear to number of participants means order of n, linear to n. Okay, and if it's order of n squared, we usually call that as quadratic kind of complexity. Quadratic is much more complex than linear. Okay, linear is a good complexity, right? When n complexity is n, it's easy. If you have 100 server, complexity is 100. But if n is n squared, then that is very scary. If you have 100 server, n squared means 10,000. Quickly increase. Okay, we call that is polynomial time is very bad. And the worst is exponential. Okay, like 2 to the power of n, and that's terrible. Okay? And it doesn't happen. 2 to the power n, 2 to the power 100, that's a huge number. Right? Okay, so this n is a good number. N squared is bad, right? 2 to the power of n is the worst. And this exponential thing actually happened to some of our society. Like the in the past 20 years, there's called Murphy's Law, where hardware every year the price is cut in half, and the size is cut in a certain size, and that is exponential. Every year you cut in half, kind of thing, and that is phenomenon advancement in the hardware technology, which was observed for the semiconductor, for example. It does have this exponential growth kind of situation. But in terms of complexity, we don't want to see that. Okay, we want to see the linear kind of thing. All right, so complexity is acceptable. Now let me get to the complicated situation, which is the nested transactions. To commit nested transaction, in fact, is a difficult problem. Committing nested transaction, we cannot use the same mechanism to commit nested transaction as what we have discussed. Because the sub-transaction means the transaction of another transaction can abort independent of the parent, right? If the sub-transaction abort, what happened to the parent transaction? Sub-transaction must have made decision to commit or abort before the parent transactions. Okay, that's sub-transaction abort or commit situation, right? And situation actually get complicated. The top level transaction needs to be able to communicate its decision down to all the sub-transactions, so this sub-transaction can react properly. So general rule is that the parent transaction, if they abort, the sub-transaction has to abort, because parent transaction need to roll back, right? The sub-transaction actually means that the parent doesn't exist, means that anything occur to them will be useless, so they have to abort as well. But if the sub-transaction aborts, parent transaction does not need to abort, so it will depend on different situation here. When sub-transaction commit, on the other hand, then we do not actually commit it yet. We call this as provisional commit. That is, sub-transaction can vote for either abort, sub-transaction can be aborted, okay? But when it commits, when the sub-transaction commits, it may still abort, because parent transaction may abort. So in that situation, we call this commit as provisionary commit. That is, abort is handled as normal for the sub-transactions, but the provisional commit means that the coordinator and the transactional server, they are willing to commit the sub-transaction, but they don't know yet, because they have to wait until the parent transaction can commit. Okay. So in that situation, we call it provisional commit. Let's take the nested transaction as an example. This slide actually shows the first slide when I gave you the example of nested transaction. Remember, in that nested transaction, we have transaction T, which has two sub-transactions, T1 and T2. And T1 sub-transaction has T11, T12 as its sub-transactions, and T2 has also T21 and T22. All right? And we also saw that T1 executes at the server X, T11 at M, T12 and T21 at server N, and T22 at server P. This is the diagram I gave you earlier. So we just use simple diagrams to show it. Now let's assume that we have T11 abort at M. This may be that server M fails. T12 and T21 provisional commit, because at server N everything works fine. And process P, server P works fine. So T22 also have provisional commit. And let's assume that T1 has provisional commit because server X also execute properly. And let's assume T2 has aborted because server Y has something wrong. So in that situation, whether transaction commit or abort eventually will be determined by a final transaction. Okay? So in this situation, we said that we need to have the information about all the transactions and sub-transactions. So what happened is that we will have transaction T includes T1 and T2. Transaction T1 includes T11, T12, and transaction T2 includes T21 and T22. So these are the child transactions or sub-transactions of the parent transactions. And T11, T12, and T21, T22, each of them, they have also their status. The last transaction that will be done will be participated by the transaction which are still alive, the coordinator of the transaction which are still alive. So the participant, they will include the transaction T which participated, because we need to decide whether transaction T will abort or commit. And often it will be the coordinator because it's a parent transaction. Transaction T1 is still working because T1 by itself is still alive, so it will participate. Transaction T includes transaction T1 and T12. And T1 and T12, they are provisional commit, right? In the previous slide, so you can see. And T11 has aborted, so it has aborted here, and T2 has aborted. So from transaction T, it has these are its subtransaction, so it knows the status. Now for T1, it includes itself is still alive, and T12 is still alive. But T12 is aborted. T11 is aborted. T11 is a subtraction of the T1. Okay? And for T2, it doesn't participate because it has aborted. So aborted is included T2, and T11 is also aborted. This is this here. So you only list the aborted with its subtransactions. For T12 and T21, the T12 will participate, but not T21, because T21 has provisional commit, but T12 has aborted already. Right? So we have provisional commit is T21 and T12. Okay? They are provisional commit, but you know that T12 doesn't participate. Why is that? How do you know that T12 will not participate? In other words, it actually will be aborted. Why is that? Because its parent transaction already aborted. T1. Oh, I'm sorry, T21. Yeah. So this is right, but not T21 because T2 has aborted. So T21, even though it's provisional commit, but it will be aborted, so it won't participate in this final decision by the transaction. And T22, the parent has aborted, just like the T21 parent has aborted. Okay. So finally, then we can see that we have the final transaction are participated by the coordinator of the transaction which are still alive, which includes transaction T, transaction T1, transaction T12, but not T21. Okay, and that's all. Right. So in that way, then, for the two-phase commit for nested transaction, then it goes like the following. For nested transaction, the top-level transaction placed as a coordinator, while participants are all provisionally committed subtransaction coordinator without aborted ancestors. So in our example, we have, let me draw it over here. In our example, then we have only 3 transactional coordinator to participate in this last transaction. Right? So we have T1, T is our main transaction, and then we have T1, right? So actually you can see that list. We have T, T1, and T12. Right? These are the 3 transactions and subtransactions that we need to decide finally whether they will abort or commit. So if we go back, this actually we can see from this diagram. This we need to determine the outcome, and this one it has provisional commit. This one is aborted, and this one has provisional commit. So this is still alive, but this is aborted already. So even this is provisional commit, this is still abort. Okay, we said that the ancestor, when it aborts, the subtransaction will also abort. So this one, and this one are still alive. That's why for the T, T1, T12. So for the nested transaction, okay, we need to finally decide by another transaction participated by these 3 transactions coordinator. And the way to make the decision, so this is what this statement said. And to make decision, there are 2 approaches to do that. One is called hierarchic two-phase commit protocol. This transaction coordinator participate in another two-phase commit protocol to determine whether it commits or abort. Hierarchic two-phase commit means that this is a multi-level nested protocol where the coordinator communicates to the immediate child transaction coordinator in a hierarchical fashion. Because T1 is the subtransaction of T, T12 is a subtransaction of T1. They form a two-phase commit protocol. In this way, with a hierarchical fashion to determine the result. We call this as a hierarchical two-phase commit protocol. The way that works is that first phase, T1 will ask for vote to T will ask for vote for T1, okay? And T1, as a part of first phase, will ask for vote from T2, okay? And then this vote will turn back to T1, and T1 will turn back to T. So T collects the votes from T1 and T1 too. Okay? And so T will have the result. So second phase will say commit or abort. So this is the completion phase. Okay? And send it to T1. Okay? And second phase here, T1 will do the same thing. This message is sent to T1 too. Okay? So this is sort of the way for the hierarchy two-phase commit protocol. So they participate in the protocol, but the way the message is transferred follow the original communication path, if you will. Okay? Because T split T1 and T2, so T can directly communicate with T1, and T1 can communicate with T1 too. And they keep the original communication structure. Another way of two-phase commit protocol form in this fashion is called flat two-phase commit. That is, a coordinator contact all the participants with a provisional commit directly. So in that way, then, that means the following. Okay? So this is a hierarchical two-phase commit protocol, and this is a flat two-phase commit protocol. The structure will be something like T will directly communicate with T1 and T12 in that way. So this is our original two-phase commit protocol, which is a flat two-phase commit protocol. So in other words, again, is that the first phase, you will directly send the vote to each of them. Okay, send the vote, right? And then they will send back the result. In the second phase, that you will send either commit. Okay, I won't rewrite here. Either commit or abort to them directly. So this is called flat two-phase commit because this is just the two-phase commit protocol we talked about earlier, in order to make the final decision about the outcome of the nested transactions. Is that clear? Understand? Okay, so there are two: a hierarchy two-phase commit and flat two-phase commit. Is that clear? Any questions? Any questions about this? No question? Then let me ask you the questions. Okay. Comparing with these two, one is hierarchical two-phase commit, the other one is flat two-phase commit. Which one send more messages? Which one send more messages? First one send more messages? You can count, right? Vote, one message. Vote, another message. And say yes, a message. And yes, message, right? And then commit, commit. Acknowledge, acknowledge. How about this? Vote, yes, vote, yes. Okay. Commit, yeah, okay. Commit, acknowledge. So the message number is actually the same. Okay. But generally, which one execute faster? First one or second one? Huh? Which one has more parallel? This one, right? You can send vote for them together. This one has to send vote here, and this one send vote there, right? So they are sequential execution. They are parallel to send the vote out. So normally, this execute faster, okay? But what's the disadvantage of this one comparing with this one? The disadvantage then is that to establish the connection from here to here may or may not be visible. Communicate with T1-2 may be easy, or because you need to re-establish the connection. But this connection was already there because this is the subtransaction of that one. So you will know it's. Remember earlier I said that the parent transaction need to know the subtransaction, so the communication link will be maintained. Okay, so that communication link was available, so that this communication guarantee can have. This direct connection from T to T1-2 may or may not exist. If it exists, then this protocol executes faster. But if it doesn't exist, then you may not even have time, have the choice of doing that one. Usually, it may exist, but you have to re-establish a transaction, which may in turn take more time. Establish a communication, which may in turn take some more time. Okay? So is that clear? That's why we have these two choices for the nested transaction, the final two-phase commit protocol to determine the outcome in the nested transactions. Okay? Is that clear? All right. There are locking and provisional commits that we need to talk about. When remember, locking, two-phase locking and two-phase commit can run together. They are independent things. Okay? Two-phase locking is to guarantee serializability. Two-phase commit is to guarantee what? The key property of transaction is atomicity. Right? So these are different properties. For the two-phase locking or the locking, they cannot be released after the provisional commit because provisional commit may still abort. You cannot release the lock because it may abort. Abort means that you have to redo all the operations. So data item remain protected until the top level transaction commits. This may reduce the concurrency. So in order to increase the concurrency, we can allow interaction between the sibling transactions. Sibling transactions are the transactions which have the same parent transactions. And if you allow them to interact, means that you allow them to run parallel and also share some resource. So question is, should they be prevented because they are treated as different transactions, or they should be allowed because they are part of the same transaction, they belong to the same parent transaction? If you allow them, then you have more parallel execution so that your transaction may run faster. On the other hand, if you prevent them, the protocol will be easier to be implemented. Okay? So generally they are prevented because we don't want to make this protocol too complicated. So this is sort of the final notation. All right. This pretty much complete what I want to talk about the two-phase commit. Any questions? So make sure you know the difference in between two-phase commit and two-phase locking. Two-phase locking is for concurrency control, and that's to get the isolation property for the transaction property, one of the 4 transaction properties. And on the other hand, the two-phase commit is to guarantee atomicity, which is the most important property in a transaction. Okay? So general transaction includes two-phase commit plus two-phase locking, because two-phase locking achieve atomicity, and two-phase commit achieve atomicity. Two-phase locking will achieve isolation, which is the serializability kind of concept. Okay? If you don't have questions, we will take a break right now. Okay? We'll take a break right now, and then we'll come back 15 minutes later. If you have individual question, you can ask me. And for those people who hasn't formed the team yet, please talk to me, give me your ID and your name so that we can type your situation in the website.
update proposal 添。
咁28號喎，
唔係嘛？
喂，好似係喎。
今日